Well, hey, everybody, welcome to Dialing In, the podcast that delves deep into the dynamic world of frontline leadership, where high stress and high pressure environments, such as call centres and contact centres, are the norm. I'm Sir John Kirwan, and I'm joined by co-host Dr. Fiona Crichton. I told Dr. Fiona Crichton our brains, so she'll be able to dig a bit deeper into the science behind what we're talking about today, which is really exciting. In this series, we'll navigate through the challenges and complexities faced with leaders in these fast-paced industries, from the constant battle against high attrition rates to the measurement of performance metrics. I think it's a bit like rugby. You play on Sunday, or soccer, or netball, and then all of a sudden you get a whole lot of people downloading their thoughts on social media, and you've got to front up with all that emotional toll of frontline sort of work. And so with us today to kick off the very first Dialing In podcast is Grant Walker, not only the CEO of a very successful Christchurch-based company, To Be Connected, which we'll hear a little bit more about shortly, but he's also chairman of the Customer Contact Network New Zealand, which empowers customer contact professionals and organisations through knowledge sharing, best practice training, networking, and advocacy for customer engagement excellence. We'll be digging in today to get his insights on the future of contact centres. Grant, welcome, mate. Take it away. Tell us a little bit about yourself, because I heard that you've come from the shop floor, mate. So you're not just making this stuff up. You've been in the trenches.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. So many people talk to any senior leader in a contact center or a call center, whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter, interchangeable, in a call center. And most of them started out on the front line, making or taking phone calls. I started out, it was never intended to have a career in call centers. We moved to Melbourne and I needed a job to pay the rent in the meantime until I found what I was planning to do. Got a temp job selling electricity over the phone. And I went home to my wife and I said, I've got this job. And she's like, you don't really like people and you hate the phone. What are you doing? And I was like, it's cool. There's 3 weeks of paid training in the classroom. So I'll just do the training and then by then I'll have a real job, as I termed it. What I found was that it's actually one of the most exciting places to be. Every day is fun. It's not what you on TV. It's not anything like what people can imagine. It's fast paced, it's dynamic, there's always stuff going on. For me, I got exposed to looking after a team, managing a team pretty quickly, got involved in IT, got involved in training, looking after clients, all sorts of things really quickly. And it was a large, hundreds and hundreds of people in the contact center. It was a big outsourced operation, did all sorts of work for all sorts of different clients and really loved it. And so about 5 or 6 years ago, the opportunities came up to move back to New Zealand and start my own thing. And to me, it was about creating an environment that was a good environment to work in, because fundamentally, all call centers involve people, which I think so many people forget about. So we moved back and set up our own outsourced operation here in Christchurch. We've got space for 120 agents here in Christchurch, and we look after all sorts of different clients. But the big thing that for me, and the reason I love it, is that it involves so many different moving parts, and people are variable, which you can't control, right? But that's what fascinates me about the business. And then I'm now at a stage where I can give back as well. So I stepped up to chair the industry body, the call center industry body, and we've got some really ambitious stuff we're taking on over the next few years to try and show people that there is a career pathway in call centers, and it's not the tiny little cubicles with thousands of people crammed into a room like you see on TV.
Yeah. The first intriguing thing, I don't know, sorry, Dr. Fiona, do you want to quickly introduce yourself? Because I know you because you're like my sister at work, but you better introduce yourself because I keep forgetting that we've got public listening.
Not at all. I'm here just to inject some science in. And before you go, JK, I just wanted to just highlight something that Grant said. I love the idea of growth and development. You just said you're actually couching this as quite a career opportunity rather than something that people might think of as being quite linear. And we know from a well-being perspective that actually growth and development is really important. So I really love that's something that you just spoke about, the idea that this is something that people have some way of growing into. Anyway, JK, you know me, my brain goes off on a tangent as well, but that's something I just thought about as we go forward into this conversation.
No, that's really interesting because about 20 years ago when I was starting out in my coaching career, a very experienced coach asked me what I thought motivation was. And I gave him the stop standard bullshit answer. And he said, motivation is when an individual feels cared for and he feels that he's growing and getting better as a person. If you can create that in your environment, then your players will be motivated. Wow. Geez, that was great insight. So if I can get every player to feel like he's getting better technically, tactically, and mentally, then he's going to want to turn up to work. I thought that was a really easy, because a lot of these words we use, the emotional words that are all different for different people. So I thought that was really interesting. The first thing I want to ask you, Grant, is I've noticed you've been around a long time. I've been around a long time. I was around when we had newspapers, and the only person that would abuse us would be the journalist if he didn't think he played well, and it was normally pretty sanitized. Have you noticed a big difference in the aggression of the keyboard warriors? We've noticed it in sport, but is there just this lack of respect for other people now, and is that growing, or am I watching too much TV?
No, no, 100%. It's definitely growing. And I think it's always been there. I think we're just more aware of it now. And I think we see more of it. But definitely in the call center environment, at the time people are not calling you because they just want to chat. They've got a problem or something's gone wrong. And you're often at the front line of bearing the brunt of that. So, service wasn't connected, or something didn't happen, or something went wrong, or, my bill's not right. All those kind of things are reasons why people call in. And it's not just calls. I talk about calls. It can be web chat, emails, social media, the works. We kind of look after everything in the call center these days. But you're at the front line, and so you're copping it square in the neck, often for something which is completely out of your control. And I think there is definitely this mentality that it's okay to unload on people because you can't see them and they're not in front of you. And we see it all day, every day. And every leader I talk to in the contact center industry has the same challenges. How do you support people dealing with just a constant barrage of abuse? And it's not everybody. So like probably 98% of people that call are absolutely fine and happy that you're trying to help them. But yeah, there's definitely an element of not afraid to unload and say things that you wouldn't say to people's faces just because you're on the phone or you're behind the keyboard.
Well, I had a funny one the other day in the airport. This woman stopped me and said, "Wow, JK, you're way uglier in person." And I said, "Well, you got no mirrors in your house," and had a bit of a laugh. Dr. Fiona, how do you actually not take that personally? Because although it might be a small percentage, I can laugh it off now. In fact, I don't give a shit, but that's probably taken me 30 years. How I'm sure you've got people like you, Grant, 20 odd years ago that have gone to do it because they need a job, or they're just thinking it as a stopgap, or other might look at it as a career. You're day one in and you get someone who calls you all the names under the sun. How do you actually not take that personally, Fiona?
I think the first thing to understand is what's going on here. There's a thing in psychology called emotional labor, and Grant will be really familiar with this in call centers, in hospitals, probably with sports people as well. There's this thing where you have to smile down the phone while somebody might be berating you or saying some stuff. So there's a disconnect between the ways that you are communicating and what's going on in your brain. Because when someone berates you or unloads on you, and it could even be a sad story, it doesn't have to be an aggressive story, what happens is the brain will go into a bit of fight or flight, right? If someone starts to be aggressive towards you, the brain goes, this is threat. Even if the practical thing is, I'm sitting here in my office, this person is far away, I'm not really in threat, the brain doesn't really understand that. And so you've got this reaction. It's a physiological response, and it's possibly something you're not even aware of, but you might have a bit of adrenaline as someone's unloading on you. And then in a call center or in a hospital, I deal with doctors and nurses as well. You can't really express what's going on up here. You have to be smiling down the phone. You're giving someone good service, because a call center is about good service. We see it in retail as well. And over time, that's very exhausting, and it is a strategy. And so you need those strategies to make sure that we are not burning out people who are in those customer-facing roles where you are required to almost act as though everything's fine. So the way that we know it is helpful is if people have strategies, one, to understand what's going on physiologically. That can be really helpful to understand this is what my brain is doing. And it's more helpful for us, rather than to pretend to show empathy, to actually learn how to show empathy, which is a weird one. But there's a lot of research to show that if you actually can step into the shoes of someone else, rather than going, this is about me, the brain will be going, this feels like it's about me. But if you can go, this isn't about me. This person who is downloading on me has got a whole lot of stuff going on. If you've got the strategies to go, this isn't about me, then the brain can calm down and you can actually diffuse the situation. And the other thing to do is to be able to take short breaks to breathe. And I don't know if you, Grant, you did this when you were in the front lines yourself, but just being able to drop the breath to the belly to remind the brain that everything's okay can be really helpful to reset. And if you have a look at that burnout in places like call centers and hospitals, it's often about people who don't have those strategies or also don't even understand that this is actually having a physiological impact. So it's about being kind to each other. So I'd be interested, Grant, what do you do when you've had one of those calls, or what do you suggest people around you do when they've had one of those calls?
Yeah, it's interesting that the take a breath thing, I still use that today when I'm dealing with difficult situations or having a tough day or dealing with a problem. So it's something that I've used for years. I think the big thing for me is I'm probably quite lucky I can remove myself from situations and I don't take it personally. But that's incredibly hard, especially when you're on the front line and you've got call after call coming in, or you're making calls, whichever way it is. You've got a manager and management saying, "Hey, you need to do it within a certain time frame and within these set parameters, so that you're performing and doing your job properly." And then you've just got to almost instantly move on. It's easier said than done. But I think a big thing is, actually just going, you know what, the person might be angry or upset or whatever emotion they're displaying, but it's not actually about me. And maybe I can do something to make their day slightly better or send them on their way with a much more positive tone. Maybe I've de-escalated it. Maybe I've just let them have their rant. And some of the most successful agents that I know and I've seen are able to do that really well. And it's about, I guess, taking that pause, and whether it's a breath or just taking a moment's pause and actually just thinking about, okay, just let the rational side of me kick in and go, okay, this person's upset because of X, Y, and Z. Yep, they may be unloading on me, but it's not about me. But what can I do to help them? And I think agents that last the distance in call centers often are able to do that much better than others. People that take everything personally, think that it is all about them and can't differentiate that, I think struggle. And they're probably the ones that don't last. And we're an industry that has relatively high attrition for a number of reasons, but one of them being that it's not an easy job. And it does take a sort of a little bit of thick skin and a little bit of good personality to be able to survive.
I think that is a really important point. Anyone listening, breathing saved my life, and I was a cynic. So I was that person, Grant, when I was playing footy. If someone heckled me in a $50,000 crowd, I'd be worried about the heckler, not about the other 49,999 that actually thought I was playing. Okay. So that was me, and I suffered from a clinical depression. And I went to a psychiatrist, and she said, JK, you need to learn how to breathe. I said to her, I'm standing in front of you. What are you talking about? I'm alive. Like, I'm breathing. But she taught me how to breathe, box breathing, and it changed my world. But then just this morning, I've been doing ice baths. I think I mentioned this off here, 3 degrees, and breathe in for 7 seconds, breathe out through your nose for 7 seconds actually tells, and you'd be able to say why this works, Fiona, but it just takes, your body's not dying. And so it's I don't know, something to do with carbon monoxide or what, I don't understand it. All I know that it works. So if you're listening, the breathing, and you watch all the sports teams now, you see them run back to halfway and they're breathing to bring them center themselves down. So even if you're a cynic, give it a whirl because it works. I just wanted to, I have a friend of mine who's in a business like yours. The business was bought for $1 billion. And I'm going, wow, $1 billion. And he said, yeah, we spend $10 million on recruitment a year because we've got a huge turnover. But you said something at the beginning that I want to relate that to, and I'm sure it's not true, but you said, you don't like people. Your wife said to you, you don't like people. But is there, and I know when you've got high attrition, you're probably just saying, I'll take anyone. But is there a personality trait that you look for, and Fiona will be able to tell the callers what I'm trying to get at, because we break them into six. I always talk about the Marvel comics when you go and why do people like going to Marvel? Because they actually see themselves in one of the characters. But do you specifically look for a person, or you just got to go, hey, babe, like we just need to take people in?
Yeah, it's saying I don't like people is probably a slight misnomer. I'm an introverted kind of person, and my happy place is at home. I don't need to be around a lot of people to be happy, so I'm quite, inwards rather than I don't like people at all. Actually, I love people and they fascinate me, but it's probably that distinction. I think there are call centers that just take take anybody, and that's been, especially in the last few years, that's been the reality for a number of them. It's we need to meet the needs of our customers, so we haven't had a huge amount of choice. But the big thing I look at when we're recruiting the people is, can you have a conversation with me? Can you actually engage with me and have a reasonable conversation? I don't look at people's CVs anymore. I'd cry if I did, because like the standard of writing in the country has dropped to a point where it's indecipherable. It's a whole other topic, but the big thing I look at is, can we sit here and have a conversation, and can you actually actively listen to what I'm saying and engage? And you don't have to talk. I find that often when you just talk about something completely random, you find out what people are really like and what they're going to be like when they get thrown one of a million different things on the phone. And I know there's all sorts of psychometric testing and all sorts of different personality assessments and things you can do. But ultimately, if you can have an engaging conversation with the person, then you will probably do well in a call center. Most of the people that we tend to hire do come from the relatively unskilled end of the market, but they've all got similar traits in terms of their background has usually involved something customer facing. So often it's coming out of hospital or retail, somewhere where had to engage with people. But the big thing that I think a lot of businesses misunderstand about their attrition is, there's an attrition where people are leaving the business altogether, and because they're burned out or the call centers are not for them. But then there's also the attrition that feeds into the rest of the business. And so often you talk to people in call centers, I keep losing my staff, and then you uncover why. And it's like, because the rest of the business uses it as a recruitment ground, because the skills you learn on the front line in a call center serve you well in every single role within a business. How to deal with conflict, how to negotiate with people, how to empathy, how to have a conversation, how to communicate. These are skills you can apply to sales, finance, IT, management, all those things. So it's not all doom and gloom. And I think that's why it's a really interesting and exciting industry to be in. And I've seen so many people start on day one and know nothing, and very quickly they end up with a role, doing something that they never thought they would, because they get sucked up into another part of the business. But I think the big thing is, it's that communication piece. Can you talk to people, have a conversation? And if you can do that, generally you're going to be okay in a call center. I think the big challenge we've got in call centers is that we're moving away from this perception of it being this sort of entry level minimum wage kind of job, to actually what we're asking people now to do is quite complex, and there's multiple systems. It's usually quite technical. All of that kind of what's my account balance stuff is disappearing to self-service digital technologies, making that part of the workforce obsolete. But the work that the call center is now being asked to do is, when all of that's gone down the toilet and gone to crap, then it's the call center stepping in to take care of it. So the roles are becoming more and more complex, and the skills that are required to do that are definitely becoming harder to learn. But the key, I think, that makes it even more important to actually think about the people on the front line, because they're dealing with stuff that is a lot harder for them to deal with. And also the cost of recruiting and training those people and the time you're investing in them is significant. It's not just 2 days training and you're on the phones and away you go. Often it's 4, 6, 8 weeks training just to be up to a basic level of knowledge to handle some of these calls.
Is that... Sorry, I was just going to ask, and I was going to throw to you about that personality stuff, Fiona. I was just going to ask if that makes your job harder, talking to your suppliers about increasing the budget to get people from minimum wage to the skilled level that they do. Because, and this might be my perception, I could be wrong, but my perception is she's minimum wage, it's high attrition, so you would have been used to a budget. Is that one of your biggest challenges, to get more money for skilled and convincing others that it's the case?
Yeah, it's definitely, for our business especially, we're an outsourcer, so we're always trying to educate people around what actually makes up that cost, and the large portion of it is wages. And so, you can pay less and you can head overseas. There's plenty of different options around, but ultimately you're getting what you're paying for. And if you want somebody who's resilient, can do the work, and is going to last, we've got to pay them more. That's just the reality. And it's the same across every call center that I speak to. There's always a challenge on budgets. I think the big thing, which I've been talking to a lot of people about recently, is we actually need to get away from the call center being viewed as a cost center. Because you think about a cost center and all you're trying to do is, let's drive down the cost. So let's pay people less, let's work them harder, let's strip away all the things they need. The reality is, for the majority of businesses, your call center is actually a profit center. And they may not be directly selling your product or service to a customer, but the experience that those customers get is directly related to your bottom line. So you need to start thinking about it from a completely different perspective. And if you start thinking about your call center, whether it's a one-person call center or whether it's a 1,000-person call center, the principle is the same. You need to invest back in your people. You need to look after them. You need to take care of them, train them, develop them, give them the skills and tools they need, because they're going to give your customers a better experience. Customers stick around longer. That generates profit for the business, or you empower your people to upsell or cross-sell or whatever's required. But when you start thinking about it as a profit center in your business, the mindset shift is quite significant. And then it comes down to call centers we're a people business. Yes, there's all sorts of wonderful technology around, but ultimately we're not going to be replacing people anytime soon. There might be less of them, but those people are going to be more and more skilled and have much higher demands on them in terms of what they're being asked to do. So we need to look after them.
That's a really interesting point I'll throw to you now, Fiona. I just wanted to say that Groov is facing the same challenges. So when you talk about well-being, it's in the cost side of the ledger. But what we talk about with performance care, and I'll talk to you about that in the call center space. It's about making people happier so they are more productive and you retain them. So it needs to go so when you talk to the CFO, they always see well-being as in that column. So we want them to say, well, listen, you retain someone, you look after them properly, and you're going to get that performance care balance, then you'll be spending less on recruitment and your productivity will go up. Sorry, Fiona, this is me talking too much. Where you go?
It's perfect because you framed it really well. And so what I heard Grant say, which I thought was beautiful, was actually this is the way that companies are viewed by customers often, as their experience with the call center. So call center people are actually key. They're really important. And the skills that they have are actually quite incredible. We're talking about people who can think on their feet. We're talking about people who can actively listen, which we know is a real skill, because when people are heard, really heard, that helps the well-being of the person on the other end of the phone. And the other thing I heard you say was, if you can, as a person with resilience, because I do think that resilience is definitely a part of being able to be a call center agent. If you're able to say, my interaction has the ability to help someone else, which I heard you say, Grant, that's really helpful for your well-being in and of itself, because you can then turn around those difficult interactions. And I think I've seen that. I worked in organizations with call centers, with Atlantis Health. I can see the joy when you've actually helped somebody. So there's actually a lot of substance to the work that's been done. And if we put resources into that area, which is often the place where people get an impression of your company, then it's a win-win. And we know that there are things that anybody needs to do for their well-being, but call center agents in and of themselves, because of the nature of their work, which is it's high intensity, it changes. You can't predict the conversation you're going to have next, which for the brain is really quite unsettling, even if you've got strategies around that. Putting some real scaffolding around call center agents so that they can maintain their productivity during the day and their ability to manage their calls. And this isn't just in call centers, it's for every human, but we know that there are some challenges for people who are dealing with others. Then we can see this thing where actually what it does is it has this like domino effect. If people are doing small things for their well-being during the workday, for call center agents, it's if there's a difficult conversation, and I wanted to talk to you about what you do, Grant, or what your people do when they've had a difficult conversation, knowing what you're going to do is I'm going to breathe or I'm going to take a break, because the research says now 2 minutes of breathing or 2 minutes of just even scrolling your phone, looking at a video on TikTok can reset the brain so that you can go step out of a difficult conversation and then step into the next, whatever it is. It might not be a difficult conversation, it could be a joyful conversation, but being able to mentally distance yourself and then come back is really good for your productivity. And so that's the kind of performance care thing that we talk about. care is actually the key to performance, and care is doing the small things we know that maintains your energy and your focus for any work that requires you to be sitting, any work that requires you to be in front of people. You need to have those strategies. So I was going to ask you, Grant, when you've had a difficult conversation, you said that you do it quite naturally. What do you tell your people to do? Have you got some sort of process for when there's been a particularly difficult conversation?
I don't think there's no real set process that you teach people, because all the situations are different, and all the agents are different in terms of how they handle things. One of the things that I've noticed is over the years is that people being able to share that experience with someone around them, and whether that's just a quick 10-15 second download, oh my God, you wouldn't believe this is what the person said, or just being able to share that problem with somebody else is really powerful. And interestingly, that's something that I think so many people are now picking up on as we shift away from the work from home thing, is that people can't actually do that anymore. We put them in a box at home, and especially call center agents, you put somebody who loves talking to somebody at home on their own and then expect them to do really well. It is incredibly challenging, because they feed off the people around them. They share the skills, they share the knowledge. And that's one of the things that we realized very early on in our business, was actually work from home is not a successful strategy for call centers, because at a pinch, absolutely, it can work, but long term, it just doesn't. And it's that skill sharing piece, but it's also the debrief and the sharing, and the just standing up and talking to your teammate, or having a manager there who you can have a conversation with, or cry, which I've seen a number of call center agents do. I haven't done it at work, not afraid to admit I've had bad days. And I think just having people around you to support you is really important. The other thing that I think works really well, and call centers are generally pretty good at it, is having some fun and having a laugh. And so sometimes it is, you've just got to laugh and just talk to the person next to you. You wouldn't believe what this idiot was yelling and spewing at me, and you hear it all. But I think actually just being able to laugh about it helps you to move on and get on to the next one. But the big thing for agents is being able to help somebody, feeling like they've actually been able to help. And so often I see it when in call centers, and it's not necessarily, it's not deliberate, but often agents have got 10, 15 different systems. They're kind of constrained in what they can actually do, or there's parameters put around them actually being able to help, and they find that incredibly frustrating. So I think if agents are actually able to help somebody on the phone, that makes them feel like they've achieved something. And we all have different jobs, but ultimately we're trying to help people achieve something. There's a reason why we do it. And so I think it's just remembering those things. But yeah, I've seen all sorts of different breathing techniques that people use, different things over the years. Everybody's different. But I think the big thing is just being aware that you do need to have some kind of strategy to deal with it. And just bottling it up and going home and unloading, or never talking about it, never dealing with it, is not the solution. And that's not just call centers, that's life. The worst person at that, for bottling things up and just shoving it down and she'll be right. I think it's probably a male thing, to be honest, probably a Kiwi male thing. That's not the way to deal with it. And I used to be a skeptic as well. I used to thought it was witchcraft doing these breathing techniques and things, but I've found myself doing the finger breathing thing with my kids. One, because it helps them, but two, it also helps me deal with the situation a lot better. So it definitely works. And even just pausing to take a quick breath before you respond to something can have a big impact in how you deal with things.
From a CEO point of view, Grant, and you've obviously run your own business, but now being chairman, you've seen a lot of other businesses. What are the three key things you believe a CEO who's about to, let's say you're starting from scratch, you're building a call center. You mentioned working at home's not ideal. So what are the three key things you believe to create a successful business?
I think the number one thing is people. You need to understand that. And there are some businesses that can survive without people and they don't really need them. And that's great. But 99.9% of businesses involve people of some description, whether that's in a call center, whether that's engineers, technical people, whatever it is. So you need to understand how to attract and get the right sort of people for your business. And we've all got different personalities and there's different types of jobs out there. And I think finding a job that suits you is key. So find the right people for your business, I think, is absolutely the number one thing you need to understand. leading any organization. And I think that's going to be different. So the types of people that I look for in a call center are going to be different to what an engineering firm might look for. But understanding that is going to be critical to your success, because if you get it wrong, you're just going to constantly churn and constantly be frustrated. I think the second thing to understand is you cannot invest enough in terms of training and developing people. Giving people the skills they need to do their job should not be viewed as something that's like an expense that we could do without. If people don't feel confident doing their job or don't feel like they've got the tools and resources around them to do their job, they're not going to stick around, and they're going to fail. You're setting them up to fail. So I think investing in that training and development piece, whatever that looks like for your business, is key. And I think the third one is probably just being understanding that people have a life outside of work. And so I've heard so many leaders over the years talk about, oh, well, people shouldn't bring that crap to work, or they shouldn't be. So what if they've got a breakup at home with a boyfriend or girlfriend, or the kids are in trouble at school, or they've got illness or something like that? They shouldn't be bringing it to work. And it's, well, people don't work that way. And you need to understand that those things have an impact at work, and you don't have to be a counselor or a psychologist for all of your staff at all. I'm not suggesting that for a second, but you do need to have a little bit of understanding and work with people, because you will get more out of them if you work with them and are understanding and empathetic towards their situation. And sometimes there's some really easy things you can do that actually help. Sometimes people just need a little bit of life advice. Like we underestimate that. Sometimes it's, and I've dealt with in the call center, people going, well, financial pressures and things at home. And it's actually, well, have you got a budget? Oh, well, I've never really been shown how to budget, even just to how to set out. Here's my rent and my food and my power and my phone and running the car and what's left over. They just have no idea. And I think we fundamentally forget sometimes that there are things we can do with our experience to help those people. So three key things would all be people related: getting the right people, giving them the tools they need, and then being understanding of them. Because if you can unlock the power of your people, then your business will be successful. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It doesn't matter even if you've got a bad product or service, you'll probably still succeed if you've got the right team and you're looking after them.
I wanted to dig into that. I know that in Victoria, they've brought in mental health into the Health and Safety Act. And one thing that Fiona and I often talk about, and the reason at Groov is the reason why we want to change the dialogue, right, is that most psychological chat, I can't even spell the words, but they're scary. They're actually wrapped in bad stuff. But like you said, we don't want our leaders to be the psychiatrist or psychologist, but there is no work-life balance anymore. I tell a little story where I was with a guy the other day, and he picks up his phone and says, oh, shit. I said, what's up, mate? He said, oh, my son came third at the bloody school swimming and I wasn't there and I feel really guilty as a parent. And I'm going, mate, my dad was an amazing father. He never came to my school ever. And if I got home and said I came third, he said, let's get down the pool and try and come first. Right? But life doesn't stop anymore. You have a fight with mumsy in the morning. In my day, you'd get home and finish it off at 5 o'clock or wouldn't talk to each other. Now you're getting a text 20 minutes later, whatever. So if you think as a manager that there is life balance and people switch off, that is impossible. You're never going to survive as a manager. But the thing I wanted to ask you, Fiona, we talk about performance care, right, Grant? Because for me, performance care is most managers know how to have the performance conversation, right? You need to do, and I'm making stuff up in call center, you need to do this many calls, blah, 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 whatever that looks like. But we haven't been able to put the care piece to it. Rugby, luckily, in most sport, we're sometimes ahead of business because you have to, because we're performing every week. But I just wanted you to explain, Fiona, that you don't have to be the psychiatrist or psychologist. That psychological safety bridge, I call it, is just trust, right? But you got to build that trust over time. So if you're listening to this, you're a manager, you've never really had that care conversation. I personally believe it's the future. If you don't have that empathy in the future, you're not going to be a manager. So how do you actually start having some of those conversations?
I think something that Grant said, and I wrote it down, unlock the power of your people, because people are not machines. And actually unlocking the power of your people is caring about them as humans. And What you said, those three things: employ the right people, and those are the people that will get joy. And that's whatever job you have, employing the right people who, and I love that you don't look at CVs, you actually listen to whether or not they're good at having a conversation, because that's the right person for your work. So that's really caring. It's like saying, okay, we're getting the right people. The second thing that you said was, now my brain went, what did your second thing was?
Training.
Oh, training and development, understanding that human beings need to be trained, because training is really important. This is a skill. And so you've got people who've got some natural talent, but you are helping them. That is actually caring for your people. Leaving people to just figure it out themselves isn't good for the business, but it's also really bad for the human. So understanding, who is this person? What do they need for training? We know that if you're employing for resilience in the call center, you need some training as well. People that are really good naturally at having a conversation might need to have some training around, and when things go pear-shaped, this is what you do. That feels obvious, but doesn't always happen. So that training and development is actually care. And finally, you said, understand that your people aren't just, don't just turn up at work and start there. They've had lives. There are things that go before. Every single one of us have been in that situation where something that's going on outside of work will impact what's going on inside of work. But the truth is, if you have a conversation and check in with somebody and say, what's going on? We see from the literature, all of the science, that in itself helps people process what's going on for them outside of work and helps them turn up at work. And yeah, it doesn't mean it's you sitting there having to have those psychological conversations around, I'm going to help and fix you. It's about, I know you. I know who you are. I know that there's stuff going on for you right now. I might offer a helping hand. I might offer you a coffee so we can talk about it. Or if you're in distress, I might call a GP for you and get you an appointment. What we don't want, obviously, is managers being psychologists. But what we do know helps is to care about someone as a whole person. And when that happens, and Grant, you do that naturally, when that happens, people are better at work. So that's what performance care is. It's not about you having to be the psychologist. It's about you understanding the human in front of you and giving them the things that they need, the tools that they need to be able to do a good job. And that's helpful for the manager, because the managers feel better. It's much better to lead a team that you know and understand, and so much better for the person that you are leading, the people on your team. And we know that it's, again, that win. It's caring for the person, which also empowers the performance. It's what you said. It's unlocking the power of your people.
And I think I just want to pick up on a couple of things you said. The performance aspect as well. Like, it's so often when you have performance conversations and you can have the superficial performance conversation, but if you actually start diving deeper, there is usually something going on that is causing people not to perform. And it's either, I don't have the skills required to do what you're asking me to do, or often it's, I was really distracted because I was getting messages from home and such as going on. So it's actually having those conversations. You don't have to solve people's problems, but it actually helps you understand and improve the performance of people if you can dive into that a little bit. And the other point I just wanted to make is that so often you talk to people and you might be the only one that's actually asked them, are you okay? What's going on? How are things? Often people are dealing with really tough situations and they feel isolated and alone because nobody's actually asked them, like, hey, I can see clearly something's going on. What's up? So I think the power of that, we can do that really well as managers often because we're not personally involved in their life situation outside of work, but we don't have to solve the world's problems. And I think that's the key. I've seen managers burn themselves out because they take on all of their team's problems. And it's something that I've mentored team leaders over the years. And I'm like, you need to be able to ask those questions, have those conversations, but not take it all on board, just like you would with a customer on the phone. You don't take it all on board. You can't take it all personally, but you can be there to support. And I think that is something that in every business is something we just don't do enough of. And if we did more of it, I feel like we'd get a whole new level of performance out of our teams. And we talk about productivity problem in New Zealand, we're not productive enough and all of that. I think actually if we had some more human conversations with our people, we might find that we get quite a significant lift in productivity.
Yeah, I think that's both really important points. One of the tips that I got also, and this is from a technical point of view. So when I first started coaching, I was really worried that I wouldn't have the technical knowledge. And to start with, when someone had asked me a technical question and I didn't know it, I'd make shit up, right? And the same wise coach said to me, and I don't mind telling you, it's Wayne Smith, who's the best coach in the world because he's a great mate and a coaching mentor of mine, said, JK, it's okay to say to people, I don't know. It's a great question and I'll find out. You get more respect from that, but then you've got to go away and find out and help them, right? And I think that's really important, both in the performance and the care situation. Often we talk about, I'm often dealing with people, they share their mental health with me and that sort of stuff. And often I'll say, wow, that's really interesting. I've never experienced that, but how can I help? So sometimes you just got to walk with people rather than have the solutions. But often as managers, we think we have to performance-wise have the answers, but also we think we have to have the care answers, but you don't. You just need to listen, be honest, and walk with them. So I think they're really important points. What are some of the best, Grant, the best practices you've seen in the care space in your industry where you go, wow, if every call center did that, we'd be way better off?
I think that's a lot of what we've been talking about. It's using the two things that are attached to the side of our head, listening. It's actually one of the most underrated skills, I think, for anybody. And I think if we actually listen to what's going on, we'd be a lot better off. It's amazing. I talk to senior people within businesses about how things are and what's going on and what's going on in your market and what are your customers saying. And it's amazing how many of them don't actually know. And that's scary to a certain degree for some of them. So actually just going and sitting in a call center and having a listen to what the customers are saying is often one of the most powerful things. And the same principle applies to your people. If you're not getting performance out of your team or something's going wrong, just go and sit down and have a conversation with them. Just ask, hey, I can see we're struggling with X, Y, and Z. What do you think the answer is, or what's going on for you? I can see that performance dropped off in the last 6 months. Like, why? What can we do? And I think asking those questions is important, but listening to the answers and actually actively listening to what people are saying is the most underrated thing. And I think if everybody did that, not just in call centers, but across the board in business, we'd be a lot better off. I've seen all sorts of awesome well-being initiatives and different things around games and having fun. And we have scooters around the office. We have food day. Call centers run on coffee and food. So have a shared food day, like break bread with people. It's phenomenal how that can help build teams. But people have got sleep pods and there's all sorts of cool things that people do. And I think all of that is great if the business can afford that and sustain that. And again, you need to look at that as an investment in your people, not a cost. But it doesn't cost anything to listen. It doesn't cost anything to ask questions. It doesn't cost anything to be a little bit curious. And often that'll give you the answers to what's going on in your business or what your customers are facing or what your agents are facing. And so that to me is the number one thing that you can do that's going to improve everything.
Do you guys know how to cook a carbonara, which is an Italian dish? It's got it's really easy. It's egg and, well, guanciale, which is pork cheek if you want. But they have a saying in Italy, easy to make, hard to make well. So I want to talk to you first, Fiona, and then get your point of view, Grant. So we've all been talking about it, and I am the biggest criminal of this, people, actively listening. So can you tell me or tell our listeners actually how you do that? So this is my personal problem. When you start talking to me, often I'll perceive I've got to the end of it, so I get impatient and want to jump in. But how, Fiona, firstly, from a scientific point of view, can I start learning to get better at this? Because it sounds like a pretty key point out of today. And then I'll get you to throw to Grant on how he actually learned it, because I'm pretty sure it's a learned skill.
I love that you asked me that question, and it ties into something that Grant said as well around the idea of understanding the kind of pressures that your people are under, really going into the call centers and listening. And you'll be aware of this study in New Zealand in 2010, or was published in 2010. They went around a lot of call centers to find out what the biggest stressor was. And the biggest stressor was, according to people in call centers, was my manager doesn't really understand what it is that I do and the kinds of calls that I take. So that was the number one stressor. And when you have that stressor, what we know is that people start to get frustrated and they don't feel valued. So actually understanding, and this is in any organization, not just call centers, it's just the research was done here. If you know what your people do, you suddenly start to build an idea of the value that they bring and the things that they are either overcoming or doing well. The biggest thing for human beings at work is to feel valued for what they do and understand that there's an understanding of their contributions. So that brings us to the listening piece. To be able to truly hear somebody, and I'm bad at it, even though it is my job. Sometimes it just means that you are asking the questions and you're not saying much. You're just listening. And JK's heard me say this many times, but when you get the opportunity to talk about maybe my day, the interactions I had, the stuff that's going on for me, what happens is it moves the problem that you're experiencing or the frustration or the worry or whatever it is out of the limbic system, which is the emotional part of the brain, into the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking part of the brain. So it's no longer a problem. It is now something that you have emotionally regulated and you can come to some solutions. So really your job is, when you're actively listening, is to say very little, but to pay attention, which means actually looking at the person when they're speaking. All of this sounds very trite, but it genuinely works. And that when people are speaking, making sure because you're not speaking, you're showing you're listening. And your people will be excellent at this, Grant, because they're doing that all the time, right? On a call center, they're actually making sure the person understands that they're being heard. It might be going, okay. So it's attention, it's non-judgment. It's about sitting there in the silence, being okay with the silence, which I have really had to learn, is like sometimes people are taking a breath to tell us, and then reflecting back is kind of thing of going, what you heard, because sometimes we get it wrong. That's like the 101 of active listening, and it's a real gift. Your call center people are giving others a gift, and to hear them is a gift to them.
How about you, Grant? Did you have to learn it? Was it hard? Did you have to look at yourself, or you were natural at it?
I think it's probably one of the skills that I find comes relatively naturally to me, and it's because I love hearing stories. And often I'm the quietest one in the meeting, and it's not because I'm not contributing or not thinking or not haven't got anything to say. It's that I want to hear what everybody else has got to say, and that's where I get the real value from. But so often I've sat in meetings and it's a competition of who can talk the most. And actually it's so counterproductive because nothing ever gets solved and nobody ever actually gets to talk about the real issues. Or people just try and solve people's problems immediately. And I think the big thing about just actually listening and not necessarily having the answers is so powerful. And if you have either your direct manager or somebody else in the business come and sit next to you in a call center and actually just listen to what you're dealing with day to day, or ask you, what's going on here? You may not have the answers, you may not be able to solve the problem straight away, but it's a really powerful thing. And it's also powerful because you understand exactly what's going on. There's all sorts of, and every call center does it in some form or another in terms of their initial training usually, and as part of their ongoing training is around active listening skills, and there's all sorts of other things that come with it. But ultimately, yeah, it's just actually listening and not feeling like you have to talk non-stop. For me, it comes naturally, but I've seen it taught to a number of people, and even people that are terrible at it can be taught it. It is a skill that you can learn. Even the most stubborn people can learn it. And I think, again, it comes down to that training and development piece. If that's the skills your team need to do their job better, work on giving it to them. And be open to some of the stuff which you might say wishy-washy. It actually is powerful and can work.
Awesome. Amazing. Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Dr. Fiona. I'm just going to give a bit of a summary, people, as we finish up. This has been amazing. I could go on for another hour because I'm so intrigued. So different people handle different situations. So understand that. When they're under pressure, sharing is important. Turning to the person next to you. Make sure that they aren't bottling stuff up and taking it home. So you need to be able to make sure you leave that stuff at work. Be open with your empathy and listen. The people in call centers are helping people. As a manager, keep emphasizing that because it's really important. Your key goal as a business should be you are helping people. Thought that was really cool. The 3 things that Grant said about attracting the right people is 1, people. Invest in training. Make sure you invest in those people. And understand there's no balance anymore. There is no work-life balance. There's just life. So ask the question. Unlock the power of people. Everyone will be different. The two things that I thought were fundamental that Grant said about when people aren't performing. They either don't have the skills or something personal is going on. And then Dr. Fiona gave me a tip on how I can get better about actively listening. Pay attention and register that you're paying attention. Do not judge people, and then recite back what you've heard so there's no misunderstanding. So I'll put that under this. Grant, I know how important time is for people, mate. I appreciate you jumping on this podcast. I've learnt, and that's my whole goal in life, is to get better every day. So thank you for sharing. It was awesome. I loved it. I've written a few personal notes for me to try and change. And thank you for bringing your beautiful brain, Dr. Fiona. It's always good to get the scientific side of it.
Thanks.
Have a beautiful day, people.
And you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.